The silver disk of the Galactic Confederation scout ship gleamed faintly against the backdrop of stars as it maintained its position above Earth's atmosphere. Inside the observation deck, Commander Min stood frozen before the wall of monitors, his four-fingered hand pressed against his chest in the gesture of profound surprise that was universal among his species. "Impossible," he whispered, large eyes blinking rapidly as he processed the stream of data. "This planet should be barren of intelligent life." Earth had long been classified in Confederation records as a death world, a planet so hostile that advanced sentience should never have evolved there. The constant earthquakes, violent storms, extreme temperature variations, and thousands of other lethal conditions made it a planetary death trap by Confederation standards. Yet the monitors showed cities, roads, and clear evidence of technological civilization. Officer Jinho approached, his normally pale skin flushing blue with excitement as he studied the readings. "Commander, their physical structure is remarkably fragile. No natural armor, minimal muscle density, vulnerable respiratory systems. And yet," Min said, tapping the screen, "they've built settlements in deserts, ice fields, mountains, jungles, and even floating on their oceans. How is this possible?" The ship's sensors continued mapping the surface, cataloging human habitation across environments that would kill most spacefaring species within hours. Even the Dravaki, famous for their resilience, would struggle to survive unprotected in many Earth biomes. "We need to study them more closely," Min decided. "Not just their cities, but how they survive in the planet's most extreme regions." Jinho nodded and moved to the navigation console. "I found something interesting, Commander. The lone human is establishing some sort of research outpost in a region with high volcanic activity. Sensors indicate frequent earthquakes, toxic gas emissions, and extreme temperature variations." Min's eyes widened. "Show me." The main screen shifted to display a rugged landscape of black rock and steam vents. A small human figure moved among several metal containers and equipment cases, setting up what appeared to be scientific instruments. "Perfect," Min said. "This will provide excellent data on their survival adaptations, maintain stealth protocols, and begin continuous observation." Jinho adjusted the sensors to focus on the human. "Subject is female, appears to be in early maturity phase. She's alone, Commander." "Alone?" Min blinked in surprise. "In that environment?" The screen zoomed in to show Dr. Hannah Kim carefully unpacking equipment from a transport container. Her movements were precise and methodical as she checked each item against a list on her tablet. Despite the harsh conditions, sulfurous gases occasionally wafting through the air, and the ground hot enough to damage her protective boots, she worked steadily with only a simple breathing mask for protection. "Record everything," Min ordered. "Movement patterns, tool usage, shelter construction. I want to understand how this physically vulnerable species survives where even our emergency teams would require full environmental suits." The ship's AI began cataloging Dr. Kim's activities as she established her camp. The crew watched in growing fascination as she selected a site near a small plateau, seemingly ignoring the more sheltered areas that Confederation safety protocols would have mandated. "Her species evolved on this death trap," Jinho said, his voice hushed with something like reverence. "Their entire existence has been a continuous adaptation to conditions that would kill most sentient life." The science officer, Suji, joined them at the monitors. "Commander, our preliminary analysis suggests humans have no special biological adaptations that should allow this level of environmental flexibility. Their success appears to be technological and behavioral rather than physiological." As they watched, Hannah began assembling a temporary shelter, anchoring it against the frequent strong winds that whipped across the volcanic plain. The structure seemed impossibly flimsy to the aliens, who were accustomed to buildings designed to withstand far less challenging conditions. "She's using the terrain," Min observed. "See how she's positioning the shelter to use that rock formation as a windbreak. And those anchors are being driven into specifically selected ground types." The day progressed, and the aliens watched as Hannah established her research station with remarkable efficiency. She set up solar panels, despite the frequent ash falls that would reduce their effectiveness. She created a water collection system that captured the morning condensation that formed on the black rocks. Every movement seemed to reflect an intuitive understanding of her deadly environment. As night fell, bringing a dramatic temperature drop, Hannah retreated to her shelter. The aliens expected her to deploy sophisticated heating technology, but instead, she simply added layers of clothing and ignited a small heating element powered by the day's solar collection. Their adaptability is extraordinary, Suji said. She's using minimal resources to maintain homeostasis in conditions that fluctuate wildly. Ta Min nodded slowly. We've been measuring intelligence wrongly. We thought advanced species would create perfectly controlled environments like our homeworlds. These humans instead develop flexibility and improvisation. Through the night, the ship maintained its observation. Sensors detected a minor seismic event that barely disturbed Hannah's sleep. The shelter flexed slightly with the Earth's movement, its design apparently accounting for such occurrences. "Commander," Jin Ho said suddenly, "the human is doing something unexpected." The screen showed Hannah outside her shelter in the early dawn light, not conducting research as expected, but simply standing motionless, watching the sunrise transform the volcanic landscape. For several minutes, she did nothing but observe as colors shifted across the deadly terrain. "Aesthetic appreciation," Suji whispered. "In a survival situation." Tai Min felt something shift in his understanding. The humans hadn't just survived their death world. They found beauty in it. The concept was alien to him, yet undeniably powerful. "I need to report this to the Confederation Council," he said finally. "This changes our understanding of intelligence evolution. A species that not only survives but appreciates a death world. There's much we could learn from them." As the Earth Day progressed, Dr. Hannah Kim continued her work, setting up scientific instruments across the volcanic field, taking readings, and making notes. She hummed occasionally, seemingly content despite the harsh conditions and her isolation. And high above, hidden from her knowledge, the aliens watched with growing respect for the remarkable adaptability of humans, the Death World survivors who had turned their planetary prison into a home filled with innovation, resilience, and unexpected beauty. A faint crackle of energy danced across the ship's sensors, causing Commander Ta Min to look up from his reports. The atmospheric monitoring systems were registering a rapid increase in electromagnetic activity in Earth's upper atmosphere. "Jin Ho, what are we detecting?" Ta Min asked, moving to the main observation screen. "A solar ejection event, Commander," Jin Ho replied, his fingers moving rapidly across the control panel. "It appears Earth is about to experience what humans call the geomagnetic storm." The aliens watched as the invisible wave of charged particles swept toward the planet. Their ship, protected by advanced shielding technology, registered only minor fluctuations in power systems, but they knew such events could be devastating to less protected technology. "The human will likely seek shelter," Sujai predicted. "Their electronic equipment is quite primitive by our standards." On the surface below, Dr. Hannah Kim was still organizing her research equipment when the first signs of the storm appeared. The sky above the volcanic field began to shimmer with waves of green and purple light, an aurora rapidly expanding beyond the polar regions where such phenomena were common. "That's not right," Hannah murmured, looking up from her tablet. The dancing lights would normally be cause for appreciation, even celebration, a rare opportunity to witness such a spectacle at this latitude. But the sudden appearance and intensity told her something was wrong. Her communication device gave a sharp beep before going silent. The signal indicator flashed red, then disappeared entirely. At the same time, several of her more sensitive instruments began to display erratic readings or shut down completely. In the observation ship, the aliens leaned forward expectantly. "Now we will see panic behavior," Jin Ho said with academic interest. Isolation is a primary stress trigger for most social species, especially in hostile environments. But Hannah did not panic. She placed her tablet in a metal case, a simple Faraday cage, the aliens realized, and closed it securely. Then she turned in a slow circle, surveying her situation with a calm expression that showed only concentration, not fear. "Fascinating," Ta-Min whispered. "Look at her physiological readings. Increased alertness, but no fight or flight response." Hannah walked methodically to each piece of equipment, examining it for damage. She made notes with a simple writing tool on a paper notebook, technology so basic that the electromagnetic storm couldn't affect it. When she finished her assessment, she sat on a rock and pulled out a small food container. "She's eating," Suji said incredulously. "In the middle of a crisis. Maintaining energy levels." Ta-Min nodded approvingly. "Very practical." After finishing her small meal, Hannah began gathering the most critical equipment. The storm had damaged her communications array beyond quick repair, and several of her shelter components had suffered electrical burnout. The aliens could see that her situation had become potentially life-threatening, cut off from contact, with damaged shelter in an unstable volcanic region. What will she do? Jin-Ho wondered aloud. Confederation protocol would call for immediate evacuation. Hannah's next actions surprised them. Instead of attempting to repair her communications or shelter, she began exploring the surrounding area more thoroughly. She approached a section of the volcanic field they had noted contained several lava tubes, natural tunnels formed by previous eruptions. "She's seeking natural shelter," Suji realized, rather than trying to fix her technology. Hannah examined several tunnel entrances, testing the ground stability and air quality at each one. Eventually, she selected a medium-sized lava tube with a wide entrance that narrowed deeper inside. The aliens watched as she retrieved a simple device that measured gas levels, holding it before her as she ventured a short distance into the tunnel. "That formation is geologically stable," Jin-Ho noted, checking the sensor readings. "A good selection." Over the next few hours, Hannah methodically transported her essential equipment into the lava tube. She established a small base camp in a wider section about 20 meters from the entrance, where the temperature remained relatively constant. The natural insulation of the rock protected her electronic equipment from further electromagnetic interference. "What is she doing now?" Suji asked as Hannah returned to her damaged shelter components. "She appears to be salvaging materials," Ta-Min replied. Indeed, Hannah was carefully dismantling the damaged shelter, separating useful materials from those destroyed by the storm. The aliens watched in growing interest as she used these salvaged components to create a more secure entrance for the lava tube, fashioning a door and frame that would provide protection from the elements while allowing ventilation. "Their problem-solving approach is entirely different from ours," Jin-Ho noted, his voice colored with professional admiration. "Less systematic, more intuitive." "Explain," Ta-Min requested, though he was beginning to understand himself. A Confederation engineer would follow established protocols. Attempt to repair communications first, then shelter, working through a predetermined hierarchy of needs, Jin-Ho said. "This human is adapting to circumstances as they evolve." She identified the natural shelter as his superior option and immediately shifted her strategy. The day progressed, and Hannah continued to modify her new home. She created a small ventilation system using damaged piping from her original shelter. She established a water collection point where moisture condensed naturally on the cooler rocks near the cave entrance. Every solution seemed improvisational yet effective. "Commander," Suji called out, "sensors indicate seismic activity building in the region." The monitoring screens showed increasing pressure in the magma chambers beneath the field where Hannah worked. Nothing immediately dangerous, but concerning nonetheless. "Does she have any way to detect this?" Ta-Min asked. "Some of her equipment appears designed for seismic monitoring, but it was damaged in the storm," Jin-Ho replied. Yet as they watched, Hannah paused in her work, head slightly tilted. She placed a hand against the wall of the lava tube, holding it there for several moments. Then she moved deeper into the tunnel, repeating the gesture at different points. "She's sensing the vibrations manually," Sujay said, amazement evident in her voice, using touch to compensate for her damaged instruments. The human returned to the entrance and began reinforcing her structures, adding flexibility to connections and bracing certain sections. She worked quickly, but without panic, as though responding to information her body had provided when technology failed. "I've never seen anything like this," Jin-Ho admitted. "The integration of instinct and rational problem-solving is remarkable." As night fell again, Hana had transformed the natural lava tube into a functional research station. She had power from salvaged solar cells, basic shelter, water collection, and even a small cooking area near the entrance where ventilation was best. Tai-Min watched as she sat at the entrance of her new home, looking out at the still shimmering aurora above. Despite her isolation and the dangers surrounding her, she paused to appreciate the beauty of the phenomenon that had caused her predicament. "I believe," Tai-Min said slowly, "we are witnessing something truly special. Not just survival, but a completely different relationship with a hostile environment than anything in Confederation experience." The geomagnetic storm continued through the night, but inside her improvised shelter, Dr. Hannah Kim slept peacefully, her adaptation complete, her problems solved not through advanced technology, but through a uniquely human blend of pragmatism, intuition, and remarkable calm in the face of disaster. The dawn of the third day broke over the volcanic landscape, casting long shadows across the black rock. Inside the observation ship, the alien crew had established a rotating watch schedule, with at least 2 members monitoring the human scientist at all times. The case of Dr. Hannah Kim had become more than a routine observation. It had evolved into a fascinating study that challenged many Confederation assumptions about survival, adaptation, and intelligence. Commander Ta-Min entered the observation deck after a brief rest period. "Status report," he requested. Officer Jin-Ho gestured toward the main screen. "The human has been awake for approximately 1 hour. She seems to be planning some modifications to her shelter." On the surface, Hannah stood at the entrance of her lava tube shelter, carefully studying the surrounding environment. The geomagnetic storm had passed, but it had left her stranded without long-range communications. Rather than attempting further repairs to her damaged equipment, she appeared to be assessing the natural resources around her. The aliens watched as Hannah approached a small volcanic vent about 50 meters from her shelter. Steam rose continuously from the opening, carrying the distinct odor of sulfur. Most species would avoid such features. Toxic gas emissions were standard hazards on volatile planets, but Hannah knelt beside the vent, placing her hand near it to feel the heat without touching the dangerous opening. "What is she doing?" Suji wondered aloud. They soon had their answer. Hannah returned to her shelter and emerged with several lengths of metal tubing salvaged from her damaged equipment racks. Over the next few hours, she carefully constructed a simple but ingenious system that channeled the consistent heat from the vent through the tubing and into her shelter. "She's using geothermal energy," Jin-Ho realized, his voice reflecting his astonishment. "She's harnessing the planet's instability as a power source." By midday, Hannah had created a rudimentary but effective heating system. The metal tubing captured heat from the vent and transferred it to a small stone chamber she had constructed inside her shelter. The heated stones then radiated warmth throughout the living space, requiring no fuel or electricity. "She's using the very features that make this planet deadly as resources," Tai-Min said, his voice filled with wonder. "Our environmental reports classify these vents as hazards to be avoided." "Most species would," Suji agreed. "The unpredictability of geological features makes them dangerous. Yet she's incorporated the danger into her survival strategy." The next day brought further innovations. Hannah established a water collection system that took advantage of the temperature differential between the cool morning air and the warm rocks. Condensation formed naturally on certain rock surfaces each dawn, and Hana positioned collection containers to capture this moisture. She filtered the water through layers of volcanic sand and charcoal from her cooking fire, creating safe drinking water from what the Confederation manual listed as a toxic environment. Her approach contradicts our basic survival principles. Jin Ho noted, "We teach isolation from hostile environments." She embraces and utilizes them. On the 5th day, Hana's ingenuity reached new heights. The aliens watched in fascination as she constructed a recycling system for her limited supplies. Food packaging became containers for collecting mineral samples. Damaged electronic components were disassembled, their parts repurposed for simple tools and devices. Even her bodily waste was carefully composted in a sealed container, the resulting material later used to support the growth of small plants she had found clinging to life in protected crevices. "Those plants shouldn't be able to grow in this soil composition," Suji said, checking her readings. "The mineral content is all wrong, yet they survive," Tai-Min replied softly. "Much like humans themselves." The true test of Hana's adaptability came on the 7th day. The seismic sensors on the alien ship detected increasing pressure in the magma chambers beneath the field. What had been minor tremors escalated into a localized event that sent a small flow of fresh lava emerging from a fissure about 200 meters from Hana's shelter. "This exceeds safety parameters," Jin Ho said urgently. "Should we intervene?" Tai-Min hesitated, his internal conflict visible. Confederation protocols strictly prohibited interference with pre-contact civilizations, yet the crew had grown to respect and even admire the lone human scientist. The thought of watching her perish when they could easily rescue her was troubling. "Prepare the emergency transport," Tai-Min decided reluctantly. "If her life becomes directly threatened, we will extract her." But Hana, alerted by the tremors and the distant glow of fresh lava, once again defied their expectations. Instead of fleeing, she quickly gathered several critical items and moved them deeper into the lava tube, away from the potential danger. Then, astonishingly, she approached the new lava flow, maintaining a safe distance, but close enough to observe. "What is she doing?" Suji gasped. "That's extremely dangerous." As the aliens watched nervously, Hana studied the flow pattern of the fresh lava. When the initial flow slowed, cooling into newly formed rock, she approached carefully. Using a long metal rod as a tool, she tested various sections of the cooling obsidian. Eventually, she identified pieces that had cooled sufficiently to handle with her protective gloves. Over the next several hours, Hana collected these obsidian pieces and incorporated them into her shelter design. The natural glass provided excellent insulation and reinforced the walls of her living space. What had started as a potential disaster had become, in her hands, an opportunity for improvement. "Cancel emergency transport," Tai-Min ordered, his voice reflecting both relief and amazement. "She's adapted to the eruption. Her shelter is now more secure than before." "It's counterintuitive," Jin Ho said, studying the shelter's new configuration. "Our emergency protocols would never consider using fresh volcanic materials as construction elements." In the days that followed, Hana's shelter evolved into a remarkably efficient outpost. She had created a living space that worked with, rather than against, the volatile environment. The consistent heat from the volcanic vents provided warmth and energy. The natural properties of the lava tube offered protection from electromagnetic disturbances and temperature fluctuations. Even the potentially deadly gas emissions were channeled to serve specific purposes in her ventilation system. But perhaps most intriguing to the watching aliens was Hana's growing awareness that something unusual was happening. Several times, she paused her work, looking skyward with scientific curiosity. The aliens observed her retrieving a small handheld device, one of the few electronic items that had survived the geomagnetic storm. She made slow, sweeping motions with it, as though searching for something. "She may be detecting our presence," Suji warned. "That device appears to be measuring electromagnetic radiation." Indeed, that evening, Hana wrote in her journal by the light of a small lamp. The ship's sensors were able to magnify and capture her words. "Something's up there." The equipment may be damaged, but I'm picking up unusual electromagnetic readings. Too consistent to be natural, too persistent to be satellite debris. We'll attempt to modify the scanner tomorrow for better resolution. She's remarkably observant, Taimin said, a note of respect in his voice. Even with damaged equipment, she's detected anomalies in her environment. Should we increase our stealth protocols? Jinho asked. Taimin considered this for a moment, then shook his head. No, let's maintain current positioning. Her attempts to identify us are further evidence of human adaptability and curiosity. It's valuable data. As night fell over the volcanic field, Hana sat at the entrance of her shelter, the warm glow from inside casting her shadow against the rocky ground. She looked up at the stars, her expression thoughtful rather than frightened. In one hand, she held her modified scanning device, in the other, her journal. The watching aliens felt a peculiar sense of connection to this solitary human who had, without advanced technology or support, created a home in one of Earth's most hostile environments. She had transformed danger into safety, problems into solutions, and limitations into opportunities. I believe, Taimin said softly, we have much to learn from these humans. The holographic display in the center of the observation deck pulsed with alarming red patterns. Deep beneath the Earth's crust, magma was shifting in ways that made every alien scientist on the ship exchange nervous glances. The subterranean sensors showed pressure building rapidly in the chamber directly below Hana's position. Commander, this is beyond concerning, Jinho said, his fingers moving rapidly across the control panel. The pressure indicators exceed all safety thresholds in our monitoring protocols. Taimin moved closer to the display, studying the three-dimensional model of the volcanic system. The interconnected chambers beneath the surface were filling with molten rock, creating a pressure buildup that would inevitably seek release. Unfortunately, the most likely path for that release ran directly through the area where Dr. Hannah Kim had established her shelter. Time estimate? Taimin asked quietly. Sujie consulted her readings. Based on current pressure increase and structural integrity of the containment rock, major seismic activity will begin within 6 to 8 hours. Full eruption potential within 12 hours. The command deck fell silent as the implications became clear. This would not be a minor event like the previous eruption. The geological model predicted a significant earthquake followed by multiple fissure eruptions across the field where Hana was located. This exceeds survival parameters, Jinho insisted, his normally calm voice rising slightly. Even with her remarkable adaptability, no unprotected human could survive what's coming. We must extract her. Taimin's inner eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of deep conflict among his species. Their observation mission had strictly forbidden interference with the planet's native inhabitants. Yet over the past weeks, the crew had developed genuine concern for the lone scientist who had demonstrated such remarkable resilience and ingenuity. Prepare the emergency transport, Taimin ordered after a long moment. But hold for my command. Let's see if she detects the danger. Her awareness of her environment has been extraordinary so far. On the surface, seemingly unaware of the alien discussion about her fate, Hana emerged from her shelter into the early morning light. She paused, looking around with a slight frown. To the watching aliens, her behavior appeared unusual. Rather than beginning her normal morning routine, she knelt and placed her palm flat against the rocky ground. She's sensing the vibrations, Sujie said with wonder. The preliminary tremors are far too subtle for human perception without instruments. Yet Hana clearly felt something. She remained motionless for several minutes, her hand pressed to the earth. Then she rose quickly and returned to her shelter, emerging moments later with a small instrument the aliens recognized as a basic seismic detector. Though damaged in the earlier geomagnetic storm, Hana had repaired it using available materials. She placed the device on a flat rock and watched its readings intently. The needle flickered slightly, confirming what her senses had already told her. Something was building beneath the surface. Fascinating, Taimin murmured. She's gathering data before responding. For the next hour, Hannah moved with purposeful efficiency around her shelter. She gathered rocks of various sizes, tested the flexibility of different materials, and examined the structural joints of her shelter with careful attention. The aliens watched as she began a systematic reinforcement of her living space, but in ways that puzzled them. Those modifications don't follow standard reinforcement protocols, Jinho noted with confusion. She's creating flexible connection points rather than rigid supports. Indeed, rather than attempting to strengthen her shelter against the coming force, Hannah was deliberately introducing carefully designed weak points and flexible joints. She used salvaged rubber materials from her equipment cases to create cushioned connection points between structural elements. She anchored certain sections deeply into the bedrock while leaving others intentionally mobile. This contradicts all Confederation emergency shelter designs, Suji said. Our approach has always been to create structures strong enough to withstand seismic forces. She's trying something different, Taimin replied thoughtfully. Instead of resisting the force, she's designing her shelter to move with it. As the hours passed, the seismic pressure continued building. The smaller tremors became noticeable even to the ship's stabilized sensors. On the surface, Hannah worked with increasing urgency, yet maintained remarkable precision in her modifications. She created a central support structure with radiating flexible joints, resembling the web of a strange Earth creature the aliens had observed in their biological surveys. Commander, we're approaching critical pressure levels, Jinho reported. The major event will begin within minutes. We should extract her now. Taimin hesitated, watching as Hannah completed her final modifications, and then, surprisingly, moved to the center of her shelter. Rather than seeking higher ground away from the danger, she was positioning herself at the heart of her redesigned structure. She believes her modifications will work, Taimin realized aloud. She's betting her life on her design. That's insanity, Jinho protested. No structure built from such basic materials could possibly withstand what's coming. Activate emergency transport, Taimin ordered. Stand by for immediate extraction. The transport system hummed to life, locking onto Hannah's biological signature. One word from Taimin would remove her from danger and bring her aboard their ship, irrevocably changing the course of human-alien relations. Before he could give the command, the first major shockwave hit. The ground beneath Hannah's shelter heaved upward, then dropped sickeningly. Fissures opened in the volcanic field, releasing plumes of gas and steam. The observation screens showed Hannah bracing herself within her shelter as the earth bucked and rolled beneath her. Transport now, Jinho urged. Wait, Taimin countered, his eyes fixed on the shelter. Look at the structure. To the astonishment of the alien observers, Hannah's shelter was moving with the earthquake, not against it. The flexible joints she had created allowed the structure to bend and sway rather than crack. When one section of ground rose higher than another, her design breakpoints separated cleanly rather than tearing apart. The anchors she had driven into the bedrock held the core structure in place while allowing the outer sections to move independently. The earthquake reached its peak intensity, registering far beyond what the aliens had calculated as survivable. Dust clouds obscured their visual sensors briefly. The crew held their breath collectively, certain that when visibility returned, they would see nothing but destruction. Visual sensors clearing. Sujai reported tensely. Structural integrity assessment beginning. As the dust settled, the impossible became visible. Hannah's shelter remained standing, while visibly altered, now sitting at a slightly different angle, and with some sections reconfigured by the Earth's movement. The core living space was intact. The sensors detected Hannah inside, her life signs elevated but stable. It's impossible, Jinho whispered. By all Confederation engineering standards, that structure should have collapsed completely. Taimin watched as Hannah emerged cautiously from her shelter, surveying the dramatically changed landscape around her. New fissures vented steam nearby, and the ground had developed a noticeable slope that hadn't existed before. Yet she was alive, and her essential shelter remained functional. Deactivate emergency transport, Ta Min ordered quietly. Continue observation. Hana walked carefully around her shelter, examining how her modifications had performed during the earthquake. She made notes in her journal, occasionally nodding with apparent satisfaction when she observed how a particular joint or connection had worked as intended. Her solution is superior to our emergency habitats for this environment, Ta Min admitted, his voice carrying a note of professional admiration. This changes everything we thought we knew about technological advancement. How so, Commander? Suji asked. We've defined advancement by complexity and power, Ta Min explained. More energy, more materials, more control over natural forces. This human has demonstrated that true advancement might instead lie in adaptation, flexibility, and working with environmental forces rather than against them. As if to underscore his point, Hana began immediately incorporating the changes caused by the earthquake into her shelter design. A new steam vent that had opened nearby was quickly rerouted to provide additional heating. The altered slope of the ground was used to improve her water collection system. I believe, Ta Min said slowly, that the Confederation Council needs to reconsider our definition of intelligence and technological advancement. And perhaps, he added, looking at the human who had survived what their science had deemed unsurvivable, our classification of Earth as a death world requires revision as well. The morning after the great earthquake, the command deck of the Galactic Confederation scout ship buzzed with unusual activity. Junior officers moved quickly between stations, preparing reports and checking systems that had rarely been used during their long observation mission. At the center of this controlled chaos stood Commander Ta Min, his normally calm demeanor now charged with a nervous energy that his crew had never witnessed before. Are we certain about this course of action, Commander? Jinho asked quietly, standing at Ta Min's side. The first contact protocols have never been breached in the history of the Confederation's exploration program. Ta Min nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the main screen where Dr. Hannah Kim could be seen rebuilding a section of her shelter damaged in the quake. I am aware of the gravity of this decision, Jinho. But what we have witnessed here transcends our standard protocols. This human has demonstrated technologies and approaches that could benefit countless lives across Confederation worlds. The decision had not come easily. Ta Min had spent the night cycle in deep communication with his personal AI assistant, reviewing every regulation, precedent, and ethical framework that might apply to their situation. By morning, he had reached his conclusion. The potential benefits of contact outweighed the risks. Prepare the landing craft, Ta Min ordered. Minimal crew. Myself, Jinho, and Suji as our xenobiology specialist. Full environmental suits and standard first contact equipment. As the crew rushed to comply, Ta Min addressed the ship's eye. Record my official statement. I, Commander Ta Min of the Galactic Confederation Scout Ship Horizon Seeker, hereby authorize first contact with Earth inhabitant designation HK1, accepting full responsibility for any consequences of this action. Authorization code Ta Min Alpha 79 Epsilon. The ship's computer acknowledged the command with a soft chime, the sound seeming to underscore the historic nature of the moment. Throughout the vast reaches of explored space, the Confederation had discovered many worlds with primitive life, but direct contact with a pre-spacefaring civilization was unprecedented. On the surface below, Hannah remained unaware of the momentous decision that would soon change her life, and potentially the future of human-alien relations. She worked steadily through the early morning hours, adapting her shelter to the newly altered landscape. Occasionally, she paused to record measurements of the continuing minor tremors, adding the data to her growing journal of observations. Inside the small landing craft, Ta Min and his chosen crew made final preparations. Their environmental suits were necessary, not for protection from Earth's atmosphere, which their biology could tolerate for short periods, but to prevent potential cross-contamination of microorganisms. Descent pattern established, Jinho reported from the pilot's position. We will land approximately 50 meters from the human shelter. Terrain is stable enough for our purposes. Proceed, Ta Min ordered, his inner eyelids flickering rapidly, the only visible sign of his tightly controlled anxiety. The landing craft separated from the main ship with barely a tremor, its advanced propulsion system nearly silent as it began its descent through Earth's atmosphere. To maintain maximum control over the first contact scenario, Tan had ordered the craft to remain visible rather than utilizing its stealth capabilities. A gradual approach would give the human time to process their arrival without immediate panic. On the ground, Hana was collecting water from her condensation system when a strange shadow passed overhead. She looked up, squinting against the early morning sun, and froze in astonishment. A craft unlike anything she had ever seen was descending slowly toward the volcanic field, its metallic surface gleaming with an otherworldly sheen. "I knew it," she whispered, a mix of vindication and disbelief in her voice. Her hand instinctively reached for her journal, where she had documented the strange readings and her suspicions of something observing her from above. The landing craft touched down gently on a flat area of cooled lava. For several long moments, nothing happened. Hana remained motionless beside her shelter, calculating her options. Her scientific mind raced through possibilities. A secret government project, an unknown aircraft type. But deep down, she already suspected the truth that seemed simultaneously impossible and the only logical explanation. The craft's entry hatch opened with a soft hiss, and 3 figures emerged. Even at a distance, their non-human nature was immediately apparent. Tall, slender forms moved with a fluid grace that suggested a different relationship with gravity. Their environmental suits could not completely conceal the alien proportions of their bodies: longer limbs, narrower torsos, and enlarged cranial areas. Hana's heart pounded in her chest, but her expression remained remarkably composed. Years of scientific training had prepared her to observe and analyze even in extraordinary circumstances. She stayed where she was, making no threatening movements, but also showing no fear. Min led his small team slowly toward the human, maintaining a careful pace intended to appear non-threatening. When they reached a point about 10 meters from Hana, he stopped and raised both hands in the universal gesture of peaceful intent. "Hello, Dr. Hana Kim," he said, his words translated by the small device at his throat. "I am Commander Min of the Galactic Confederation. We have been observing your remarkable survival and adaptation in this hostile environment. We come in peace and with great respect for your achievements." Hana's eyes widened at hearing her name spoken by the alien being. Her initial shock quickly gave way to her dominant personality trait: scientific curiosity. She straightened her posture and responded with remarkable composure. "I suspected something was watching me," she said, her voice steady despite the extraordinary situation. "Your craft produces distinct electromagnetic patterns that my equipment detected even in its damaged state." Min tilted his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement among his people. "Your observational skills are exceptional, especially given your limited resources. That is one of many reasons we have made the unprecedented decision to initiate contact with you." The following hours unfolded in a series of carefully managed interactions. Min explained the Confederation's mission of planetary observation and classification. He described how Earth had long been categorized as a death world, a planet too geologically unstable and environmentally diverse to support advanced civilization. "Yet here you are," he told Hana as they sat outside her shelter, the 2 alien scientists recording every word of the historic conversation. "Not merely surviving but thriving in conditions that our models predicted would be unsurvivable without advanced technology." Hana listened with fascination, occasionally asking incisive questions that impressed even Jinho, the most skeptical member of the alien team. When Min finished his explanation, she walked them through her shelter, explaining each adaptation and innovation she had created. "You see, this connection point is designed to break in a controlled way during seismic activity," she demonstrated, showing them a cleverly designed joint in her structure. "Rather than building to resist the force, which would ultimately fail, I build to channel and redirect it." Sujai studied the simple but effective design with obvious admiration. This approach contradicts our fundamental engineering principles for hostile environments. We build shields and barriers against environmental threats. You build connections and pathways. Your approach to hostile environments is revolutionary, Taimin told her. You don't fight against deadly conditions, you incorporate them. Hannah smiled, the first real smile the aliens had seen from her. That's the history of human adaptation in a nutshell, Commander. Earth has never been a gentle home for us. We've survived by working with its forces rather than against them. As the day progressed, the exchange of knowledge deepened. The aliens shared information about their propulsion systems and environmental management technologies. Hannah offered insights about adaptive architecture and resource recycling that had never occurred to Confederation engineers. I believe, Taimin said as the Earth's sun began to set, that this meeting will change the course of both our civilizations. The Confederation will need to reassess not only Earth's classification, but our entire understanding of what constitutes an advanced civilization. That night, as the alien craft remained on the surface and Hannah slept in her shelter, Taimin recorded his preliminary report for Confederation headquarters. His words were measured but carried an unmistakable note of excitement rarely heard in official communications. The human approach to environmental challenges represents a paradigm shift in our understanding of technological advancement. He dictated, her shelter design, created with minimal resources in extreme conditions, achieves results that our most sophisticated emergency habitats cannot match in similar environments. In the months that followed, the consequences of that first meeting expanded beyond anything either Hannah or Taimin could have anticipated. Earth's classification was formally changed from Death World to Adaptive Innovation Center. Hannah's shelter design became the template for a new generation of Confederation structures on geologically unstable worlds, saving countless lives during natural disasters. A careful program of limited contact was established, bringing together human and alien scientists to tackle the most pressing environmental challenges facing both civilizations. The exchange was rarely one-sided. Humans learned much from alien technology, but the aliens perhaps learned more from the human capacity to innovate under pressure. 1 year after the first contact, Commander Taimin stood before the Confederation Council to present his final report on the Earth mission. The chamber fell silent as he concluded with words that would be recorded in the historical archives of 1,000 worlds. Perhaps, he said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast hall, we have been measuring advancement by the wrong metrics all along. The humans' greatest technology isn't their machines, but their remarkable ability to adapt, innovate, and thrive where all our models predict they should fail. In this quality, they may be the most advanced species we have yet encountered in our explorations. I recommend not only continued contact but accelerated cultural and scientific exchange, with appropriate safeguards for both civilizations. The Council's approval was unanimous, an unprecedented response that reflected the profound impact of a single human scientist who had built an ingenious shelter on a world that the stars had deemed too deadly for intelligent life to call home.